Environmental externalities arise when economic activities generate benefits or costs that extend beyond the immediate actors involved. When these effects go unaccounted for, society often bears hidden environmental burdens, such as degraded ecosystems, polluted air or water, and long-term resource depletion. Addressing these issues requires a policy framework capable of correcting market failures and promoting more sustainable patterns of production and consumption. This theme introduces the broad logic behind environmental policy instruments, which are designed to internalize external costs and guide economic decisions towards socially desirable outcomes. The focus is on understanding how different tools, such as regulations, market mechanisms, and voluntary approaches, can shift behavior by influencing incentives, imposing limits, or creating new opportunities for compliance and innovation. The central idea is that well-designed policies not only reduce environmental harm, but also protect ecosystem services essential for current and future generations. In practical terms, policy instruments play a dual role. On one hand, they restrict harmful activities by setting boundaries and performance expectations. On the other, they encourage environmentally responsible behavior through economic signals or cooperative initiatives. By integrating these approaches, policymakers can create balanced strategies that address environmental challenges while maintaining economic functionality. This theme, therefore, lays a foundation for exploring specific policy tools and understanding how they interact to correct externalities effectively and efficiently. Environmental externalities represent one of the most persistent challenges in sustainable development. They occur when the full social and environmental cost of a given activity is not reflected in market prices, leading to an overproduction of pollution and an underinvestment in environmental protection. The challenge arises because individuals and firms may operate efficiently from a private perspective, yet the cumulative impact of their actions imposes broader costs on society as a whole. The concept is illustrated here through the contrast between private incentives and collective outcomes. While firms often optimize internal costs, the absence of corrective measures means that pollution, resource overuse, or ecosystem degradation remain unaddressed. This disconnect between private gain and public impact explains why environmental problems persist even when solutions are technologically feasible and economically justified. The framework for addressing these issues relies on policy interventions capable of realigning incentives. By incorporating environmental costs into decision-making processes, whether through pricing mechanisms, regulatory limits, or cooperative initiatives, policies ensure that environmental consequences are taken into account. The goal is not merely to restrict harmful behavior, but to create conditions where sustainable choices become rational and advantageous. This approach sets the stage for the examination of policy instruments that follow, highlighting how different tools contribute to a coherent strategy for addressing externalities. Environmental policy instruments can be grouped into 6 major categories, each offering distinct mechanisms for influencing behavior and reducing environmental impacts. Regulatory approaches establish legally enforceable requirements, such as emission limits, technology standards, or operational conditions. Market-based mechanisms rely on financial incentives, such as taxes, subsidies, or tradable permits, to align economic decisions with environmental objectives. Voluntary tools encourage organizations to adopt best practices through cooperative programs, certification systems, and corporate responsibility initiatives. Each category plays a complementary role. Regulations provide clear boundaries and ensure minimum environmental performance. Market instruments promote cost-effective solutions by rewarding innovation and allowing flexibility in compliance strategies. Voluntary tools foster engagement and continuous improvement, often going beyond mandatory requirements. Understanding how these instruments differ and how their strengths can be combined is essential for designing robust environmental strategies. This section prepares the ground for a deeper exploration of regulatory tools, which serve as the backbone of many environmental policy frameworks. Regulatory approaches rely on the authority of the state to establish enforceable environmental standards. These standards define acceptable levels of emissions, required operational practices, or specific technologies that must be adopted to ensure compliance. Because they impose clear and non-negotiable limits, regulatory instruments are often used when environmental risks are severe, when scientific certainty is strong, or when uniform performance is essential. The effectiveness of regulatory approaches lies in their ability to provide predictability and clarity. By setting explicit requirements, they eliminate ambiguity about expected behavior and create a level playing field across sectors. However, regulatory measures must be carefully designed to avoid unnecessary rigidity or excessive administrative burdens. Flexibility can be introduced through phased implementation, alternative compliance pathways, or periodic reviews. This section introduces the foundational logic of direct regulation, which continues to be one of the most widely used instruments for addressing environmental externalities. Emission standards specify quantitative limits on pollutants released into the environment. By defining maximum allowable emissions per unit of activity or per installation, these standards directly constrain environmental impacts while enabling firms to choose the technologies or operational practices best suited to meeting the requirements. They are applied across sectors such as power generation, transportation, and industrial manufacturing. The value of emission standards lies in their precision and enforceability. These limits ensure that polluting activities are kept within boundaries that reflect environmental and public health considerations. At the same time, firms retain the flexibility to determine how compliance is achieved, which encourages cost-effective solutions and can drive technological progress. The discussion here highlights the importance of such standards as tools that protect environmental quality through quantifiable and enforceable parameters. Tiered emission categories divide vehicles into classes based on their environmental performance. Standards such as LEV, ULEV, and SULEV define progressively stricter thresholds for pollutants like nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, and hydrocarbons. This tiered structure creates a clear pathway for technological advancement by signaling long-term expectations to manufacturers. Such systems encourage continuous improvement. Less stringent categories accommodate existing technologies, while advanced tiers reward innovation and provide incentives for cleaner alternatives. The approach supports gradual fleet transformation, allowing the industry to adapt over time while steadily reducing vehicle-related emissions. This section demonstrates how categorization can be used to structure progress, promote innovation, and enhance compliance across transportation systems. Designing effective emission standards requires careful consideration of how performance is measured. Concentration-based limits regulate the amount of pollutant per unit of output, while mass-based limits control total emissions over a specified period. Each method has implications for environmental outcomes and operational behavior. Mass-based limits, for example, may encourage efficiency improvements in fuel switching, whereas concentration-based metrics focus more directly on emission intensity. Another key design choice involves selecting between outcome-based performance standards and prescriptive technology mandates. Performance standards allow inherent flexibility and enable firms to adopt the solutions that best suit their operational context. Technology mandates, by contrast, provide certainty about expected practices but may be less adaptable to innovation. Understanding these distinctions is essential for developing standards that balance environmental ambition with technological and economic feasibility. The success of emission standards depends not only on their design, but also on the supporting systems that ensure effective implementation. Credible verification mechanisms are essential for monitoring compliance and deterring misconduct. Reliable measurement protocols, third-party oversight, and transparent reporting strengthen the integrity of regulatory programs. Periodic tightening of standards plays a complementary role, driving technological progress and ensuring that regulations remain aligned with evolving scientific knowledge and environmental priorities. Gradual adjustments also provide predictability, giving firms time to invest in innovation while maintaining consistent pressure for improvement. Complementary incentives, such as subsidies for clean technologies, recognition programs, or tax advantages, reinforce the effectiveness of standards by rewarding proactive behavior. Combined, these success factors support a regulatory environment capable of delivering sustained reductions in emissions while maintaining economic stability. Technology requirements specify the equipment, systems, or operational procedures that must be used to control pollution or reduce environmental impacts. These mandates ensure that proven and reliable technologies are widely adopted, especially in sectors where performance variability poses substantial risks. By standardizing solutions, they minimize uncertainty and create consistent expectations across industries. Although this approach can limit flexibility, it is valuable when harmful emissions must be controlled rapidly or when performance depends heavily on specific technologies. Mandates can also catalyze innovation by creating stable demand for advanced equipment and encouraging manufacturers to invest in research and development. This section underscores the role of prescriptive solutions as tools for ensuring dependable and uniform environmental protection. Effective environmental governance requires balancing regulatory certainty with adaptability to changing conditions. Specific device mandates offer strong predictability because they specify exactly what must be installed or operated. Broader category-based requirements, by contrast, allow organizations to choose from a wider set of solutions, encouraging innovation and reducing compliance costs. Periodic updates ensure that policies remain relevant as technologies evolve and new scientific evidence emerges. This adaptive approach supports long-term environmental goals while avoiding regulatory stagnation. Together, these elements create a framework that provides clarity, encourages continuous improvement, and maintains the flexibility needed to respond to new challenges. This concluding theme highlights how regulatory systems can remain both stable and dynamic, reinforcing their effectiveness over time. Small and medium-sized enterprises often face substantial challenges when complying with environmental regulations that require capital-intensive technologies. While large firms can distribute these costs across broader operations, smaller businesses encounter proportionally higher financial burdens that may restrict their ability to invest in necessary upgrades. This context helps explain why policy design must account for scale, ensuring that environmental goals do not unintentionally place smaller firms at a structural disadvantage. A central element of this discussion is the recognition that technology mandates or compliance schedules must be flexible enough to accommodate different operating capacities, phased implementation, alternative compliance pathways, and assistance programs can prevent abrupt financial pressures that might otherwise threaten the viability of smaller enterprises. Well-calibrated rules allow firms to transition gradually, aligning environmental improvements with their financial realities. Financial tools, such as green credit guarantee schemes, play a complementary role. These mechanisms reduce perceived risk for lenders, making it easier for small businesses to secure the financing needed for environmental upgrades. By mitigating upfront expenditure risks, such instruments promote broader uptake of cleaner technologies while lowering the likelihood of non-compliance driven not by negligence, but by financial constraint. This approach not only protects the competitiveness of smaller firms, but also strengthens environmental outcomes by supporting inclusive participation in regulatory transitions. Protected areas constitute one of the most established tools for conserving biodiversity and maintaining ecosystem integrity. By designating specific geographic zones where human activities are limited or controlled, these areas help preserve ecological processes that might otherwise be threatened by land use change, resource extraction, or habitat fragmentation. Their legal designation transfers certain exploitation freedoms from private actors to public or collective governance systems, ensuring long-term environmental stewardship. The purpose of these areas is not merely to restrict activities, but to maintain the natural systems that sustain both local communities and broader society. Ecosystem functions such as nutrient cycling, species refuge, and watershed protection depend on landscapes that remain largely intact. Protected areas are therefore designed with zoning arrangements that differentiate between core conservation zones and buffer areas where limited sustainable use may still occur. This layered approach helps balance conservation with community needs. Understanding protected areas as spatial policy instruments highlights their broader role in environmental governance. Their effectiveness relies on clear designation, appropriate management structures, and community engagement. When these components align, protected areas serve not just as ecological sanctuaries, but as strategic investments in long-term resilience and environmental security. Protected coastal ecosystems deliver a wide range of services that are essential for both environmental resilience and economic well-being. One of the most important is storm surge attenuation. Mangrove forests and coastal wetlands act as natural buffers, absorbing wave energy and reducing the severity of storm impacts. As climate change intensifies extreme weather events, these ecosystems provide increasingly valuable protection for communities and infrastructure. Another key service is carbon sequestration. Coastal habitats such as mangroves, seagrasses, and salt marshes possess sediment-rich soils that store carbon far more efficiently than terrestrial forests. By capturing and retaining atmospheric carbon, these systems contribute significantly to global climate mitigation efforts, highlighting the importance of preserving them. These areas also play a vital role in supporting fisheries, Many commercially important species rely on protected coastal habitats as nursery grounds, where they can grow and develop with reduced exposure to predation and human disturbance. This ecological function sustains local economies by maintaining fish populations and ensuring the long-term viability of adjacent fishing communities. Recognizing the multifaceted services provided by coastal protected areas underscores their value as natural infrastructure essential for resilient coastal development. Protected areas function within a governance framework that determines how rules are established, enforced, and adapted. One traditional model is centralized state administration, where government agencies manage access rights and oversee compliance. This approach ensures uniform standards and allows authorities to implement consistent conservation measures. However, limited communication with local communities can sometimes create frictions or undermine conservation outcomes, particularly when regulatory decisions do not account for local realities. An alternative model is community-based management. In many regions, locally managed territories under customary governance systems achieve high ecological performance even without heavy enforcement structures. Evidence from tribal lands shows that devolved governance tied to cultural values often fosters stronger compliance, as stewardship responsibilities are embedded within community identity and social structures. This model relies on bottom-up engagement, emphasizing cooperation rather than oversight. Complementary instruments, such as payments for ecosystem services, further strengthen governance systems by providing compensation or alternative income sources. These mechanisms align conservation objectives with social well-being, especially where economic activities are restricted. Effective governance therefore arises from a combination of regulatory capacity, cultural alignment, and economic support, allowing protected areas to fulfill both ecological and social functions. Market-based instruments harness the power of price signals to integrate environmental considerations into economic decision-making. Instead of prescribing specific actions, these tools influence behavior indirectly by altering the relative costs of environmentally harmful or beneficial activities. When externalities are priced correctly, markets become mechanisms for achieving policy goals efficiently, encouraging actors to find the lowest cost pathways to compliance. This category includes measures such as taxes, subsidies, and tradable permit systems. The underlying logic is that individuals and firms respond predictably to economic incentives. By shifting financial signals to reflect true social costs, market-based instruments reduce environmental impacts while maintaining flexibility for regulated entities. Their effectiveness depends on careful design and strong institutional support, but when well implemented, they generate continuous incentives for innovation and improvement. Market-based approaches also foster transparency by revealing the economic value of environmental resources. They offer a dynamic alternative to prescriptive regulation, allowing markets to allocate resources efficiently while achieving environmental outcomes aligned with public objectives. Taxes and subsidies represent foundational tools for correcting environmental externalities by modifying the financial structure of economic activities. Environmental taxes increase the cost of behaviors that generate negative externalities, aligning private costs with social costs. The principle originates in Pigouvian taxation, which sets tax levels equal to the marginal damage caused by harmful activities. This alignment encourages reductions precisely up to the point where further mitigation becomes more expensive than the damage avoided. Subsidies, meanwhile, reduce the cost of activities that generate positive environmental benefits. Both taxes and subsidies shift market signals so that environmentally responsible behavior becomes more economically attractive. By restructuring these incentives, policymakers can influence decisions across sectors, ranging from energy generation to transportation and industrial production. Understanding these mechanisms emphasizes their role in promoting cost-effective and socially efficient environmental outcomes. When properly designed, price-based corrections encourage innovation, reduce pollution, and stimulate sustainable investment, all while preserving flexibility in how economic actors choose to respond. Environmental taxes can generate significant public revenue, which opens opportunities for strategic reinvestment. One pathway is revenue collection dedicated to environmental projects or the development of green infrastructure. Redirecting funds toward these objectives amplifies the environmental benefits of taxation by supporting initiatives that further reduce emissions or protect ecosystems. Another channel involves compensatory transfers to households, particularly those with low incomes. This approach produces a double dividend. It advances environmental goals while reducing economic inequality. By lowering income taxes or providing direct rebates, policymakers can offset the financial burden that environmental taxes might place on vulnerable populations. Addressing regressivity is essential, as lower income groups tend to spend a larger proportion of their income on taxed goods such as fuel. Without compensatory measures, climate-related taxes could disproportionately affect those least able to absorb cost increases. Effective policy design therefore requires careful analysis of consumption patterns and targeted redistribution strategies. Revenue recycling is thus a critical component for ensuring that market-based instruments remain both effective and socially equitable. While taxes reduce undesirable outcomes, subsidies operate by encouraging beneficial behaviors that might otherwise be underadopted. Many environmentally friendly technologies or practices generate broad societal benefits, but offer limited private returns, leading to insufficient uptake in competitive markets. Subsidies help bridge this gap by reducing investment costs and reshaping cost-benefit calculations. In agriculture, for example, farmers who adopt erosion control practices contribute to downstream water quality improvements. These benefits extend well beyond their own fields, yet the upfront costs may deter adoption. Subsidies support these transitions by making environmentally beneficial practices financially viable, promoting long-term sustainability. By lowering financial barriers, subsidies facilitate broader diffusion of technologies and practices that enhance environmental outcomes. This dynamic underscores their importance as tools for driving positive externalities into mainstream economic activity, contributing to a more resilient and sustainable system. Cap-and-trade systems establish a regulatory ceiling on total emissions or resource extractions. Within this limit, authorities allocate or auction tradable permits to regulated entities. These permits represent the right to emit a defined quantity of pollutants. By converting environmental burdens into marketable assets, cap-and-trade mechanisms introduce scarcity and leverage market forces to determine where reductions occur most efficiently. The economic logic is straightforward. Firms with lower abatement costs reduce their emissions and sell excess permits, while firms with higher costs purchase permits when doing so, is cheaper than implementing internal measures. This flexibility equalizes marginal abatement costs across participants and minimizes overall compliance expenses. Cap-and-trade systems therefore provide a structured yet adaptable framework for achieving environmental goals. Their success depends on robust monitoring, transparent transactions, and well-calibrated caps that reflect scientific and policy priorities. Designing a robust cap-and-trade program requires attention to several key elements. First, caps must be stringent enough to drive meaningful reductions while remaining politically feasible. Caps that are too generous depress permit prices and diminish incentives for innovation. Gradual tightening over time keeps the system aligned with long-term climate goals. Second, allocation methods matter. Free allocations based on historical emissions, known as grandfathering, can help ease transitions for incumbents, but may disadvantage new entrants. Auctions, by contrast, generate public revenue and distribute permits more competitively. Hybrid approaches combine free allocation for trade-exposed sectors with auctioning for others. Third, temporal flexibility enhances system stability. Banking provisions allow unused allowances to be saved for future use, smoothing compliance costs. Borrowing mechanisms permit regulated entities to use allowances from future periods, though safeguards are needed to prevent market destabilization. These elements together shape the environmental effectiveness, economic efficiency, and political durability of cap-and-trade systems, making careful design a central component of successful implementation. Cap-and-trade mechanisms have been applied successfully in multiple regions, offering practical evidence of their effectiveness. One of the most widely cited examples is the U.S. Acid Rain Program, which introduced sulfur dioxide trading to address acid deposition across the energy sector. By creating a national system of tradable allowances, the program achieved substantial emission reductions at costs significantly lower than traditional regulation would have imposed. The experience demonstrated not only the economic efficiency of market-based approaches, but also their capacity to deliver environmental benefits rapidly and at scale. The European Union emissions trading system represents another major application. Covering multiple industries and member states, it has evolved through several phases to strengthen caps, enhance monitoring, and refine allocation rules. Its presence has influenced corporate behavior across the continent, encouraging investments in cleaner technologies and shaping long-term decarbonization strategies. Regional systems such as the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative in the northeastern United States and the California Cap-and-Trade Program further illustrate how flexible frameworks can be tailored to local contexts. Together, these examples highlight the adaptability of quantity-based instruments across sectors and jurisdictions. They also show the importance of continuous system refinement, transparent oversight, and integration with broader climate and energy policies. Payments for Ecosystem Services, PES, create structured economic exchanges designed to sustain or enhance ecosystem functions. These arrangements link those who benefit from ecological services with those who manage the landscapes that provide them. PES transforms what would otherwise remain positive externalities, such as forest conservation that improves water quality downstream, into explicit compensated transactions. By doing so, PES schemes align private incentives with public environmental benefits. The structure of PES differs from traditional regulation because it is based on voluntary contractual agreements. Each contract defines the specific service being provided, establishes clear baselines, and sets out the conditions under which transfers occur. Monitoring ensures that payments are contingent on verified delivery. This results-based model strengthens accountability and provides transparency for both providers and beneficiaries. A well-implemented PES program generates strong incentives for ecosystem stewardship. It encourages land managers to adopt conservation practices that might otherwise be financially unattractive, while providing beneficiaries with a reliable mechanism to secure long-term environmental outcomes. PES thus serves as a bridge between economic development and ecological integrity, reflecting a collaborative approach to environmental management that recognizes the mutual dependence between human and natural systems. Effective PES systems depend on several foundational components that ensure clarity, accountability, and mutual trust among participants. The first is service identification. The environmental service, such as water purification, carbon sequestration, soil erosion control, habitat provision, or pollination, must be clearly defined so that all parties understand what is being produced and what is being compensated. A second essential element is conditionality. Payments are not made for intentions or general land stewardship, but for verified delivery of specific outcomes. This requires measurable baselines, credible monitoring, and assessment of additionality to confirm that the service exceeds what would have occurred under normal conditions. Conditionality strengthens system integrity and improves cost effectiveness. Another key component is party definition. PES arrangements require clearly identified buyers and sellers, those who benefit from the ecosystem service, and those who manage the land or resources that supply it. These actors may include municipalities, companies, cooperatives, NGOs, or community groups. Their roles must be explicitly outlined to ensure transparent exchanges. Finally, voluntary participation underpins the legitimacy and long-term sustainability of PES programs. Coercive arrangements undermine trust and weaken cooperation, whereas voluntary agreements encourage collaboration and reinforce stewardship norms. Together, these foundational elements create a structured and credible environment for ecosystem service transactions. Voluntary and informational approaches complement more formal policy instruments by shaping environmental behavior through transparency, social norms, and self-initiated commitments. These approaches do not impose mandatory requirements. Instead, they rely on information disclosure, public awareness, and social recognition to encourage individuals and organizations to adopt environmentally responsible practices. Such instruments often work by reducing information asymmetries. When stakeholders have access to clear, credible information about environmental performance, they are better equipped to make informed decisions over time. This transparency helps establish new expectations and norms. Companies may adopt voluntary guidelines to demonstrate leadership, strengthen brand reputation, or respond to consumer pressure. Communities may establish voluntary agreements to protect local resources or improve environmental quality. The effectiveness of these approaches depends on the accuracy, accessibility, and trustworthiness of the information provided. They can be especially powerful when combined with market-based or regulatory frameworks, as they create cultural momentum that reinforces formal policies. By leveraging social dynamics rather than legal mandates, Voluntary and informational approaches expand the toolkit available for promoting sustainable behavior. Eco-labeling serves as a voluntary, market-oriented mechanism that provides consumers with reliable information about the environmental qualities of products or services by signaling adherence to defined sustainability criteria, such as low emissions, reduced resource depletion, or positive contributions to ecosystem services. Eco-labels help bridge information gaps between producers and buyers. This transparency enables consumers to favor products with lower environmental footprints, thereby shifting market demand toward more sustainable practices. Credibility is fundamental to successful eco-labeling. Effective programs rely on scientifically grounded standards that reflect measurable indicators across a product's life cycle. Independent third-party verification ensures compliance with these standards, reducing the risk of greenwashing and reinforcing consumer trust. Consistency in logo use and clear communication about certification criteria further support recognition among non-specialist audiences. Eco-labels not only influence consumer behavior, but also encourage producers to innovate and align their processes with sustainability benchmarks over time. They help normalize environmentally responsible consumption and production patterns. By functioning as market signals, eco-labels complement regulatory measures and contribute to broader environmental policy objectives.